It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. But Craig, you're up first. And I certainly want to get your take as a Republican to figure out what's going on with the House. And then along with Al, I'd like to have you both talk a little bit about the consequences of this. I mean,
well, it's not very often that you can sit around and say, you know, we're watching something that hasn't been seen in 100 years. So nobody who's paying attention to this was clearly alive the last time we went through this. The reliance upon a law in the House back to 1789 that says you have to elect the speaker before you can do anything is pretty profound. But it's a pretty profound notion, and I think that anybody who's listened to us knows that I, as a Republican, I'm not a huge fan of Kevin McCarthy. I felt that he wasn't the kind of leader the party needed. He's proven he can get, you know, all but 20 votes of his Republicans, but he could only afford to lose 4. So I think he's a long way, and I think it's slipping away, or it's going to be won in such a manner that it'll be almost impossible for him to hold on to the speakership over time. And yet now every move he makes to deal with the 20 votes that have opposed him in ballot after ballot, the moves he makes are going to offend the larger number of Republicans who listened to Kevin McCarthy say that there was a bright red line he would not cross with respect to some of the rules that he's now crossed. And at some point, you just don't know, you know, what to believe. Al and I operated at a time when, you know, your word was your bond, and if you said something like that you would not cross the line, then that's what it meant. But clearly, there's nothing, it appears, that Mr. McCarthy won't do to win this. Your point, I think, is the important one. Is it's you know, it's been termed embarrassing. It's you know, cable news drama for those who are watching, but there are real consequences. I mean, you know, the House of Representatives is a very important body within our government. These members can't get a security clearance, therefore they can't stay up to date on what's happening from the intelligence community. They can't meet, they can't pay, probably can't pay themselves, and at some point maybe not be able to pay staff, which I suspect will ultimately break the deadlock when the paychecks don't start coming in. I also think they're undoubtedly taking a lot of heat from folks back home. My guess is that Kevin McCarthy knew this was going to play out over, you know, 3 or 4 ballots. This is more than he, I'm sure, bargained for. He thought he could endure. I don't know. There's not a real clear path. I've sort of suspected that another one of the Republicans in leadership, Scalise is the one that kind of comes to my mind, but would be someone around whom Republicans would rally just to put an end to this. Let's hope that not too much is given away before that happens.
Al, your turn.
Well, first of all, you know, Tip O'Neill used to say that all politics is local. So I want to start with Andy Harris, who is one of the nutcases voting against McCarthy. But for Andy Harris, he's already had his biggest victory of the year because they took down the magnetometer. So now he can carry his gun onto the House floor. I mean, the inmates are in charge of the asylum. There's no question about that. What I thought I'd do, you know, in one of my former lives, I was director of the House Democratic Caucus when we had the majority. Tip O'Neill was speaker. So I thought I might explain just very briefly how this works so people can really understand what's happening. After the election, both party conferences or caucuses get together and they have a meeting, and they they vote on 2 things that are then party line votes when you get to the floor. One is their nominee for speaker. Kevin McCarthy lost 31 votes in that caucus, and so he's 2/3 of them are still against him, which is pretty astonishing because part of the deal is everybody says, okay, well, we'll fight it out in the caucus, but then when we get to the floor, we'll vote for our party's nominee. That obviously didn't happen. The second is very important too. It's on the rules. The House is operates on majority vote, and so the rules are very important. It determines what can come to the floor, who has power in the body, all of that, what the responsibilities of committee chairman are going to have. And, there are sometimes compromises on the rules, but again, that's a party line vote. And so we haven't even gotten to the rules and we're already in complete disarray. So what are the consequences? I mean, I think that substantively, you already seen that there's complete chaos in the House. They can't get 218 votes for their own nominee for speaker. How are they going to get 218 votes on any piece of legislation? McCarthy was screaming last month, let's let the funding of the government go to the first of the year so the Republican Congress can do it. Yeah, the government probably be looking for its money for the next 11 months. I mean, I don't see how they can govern. The second thing that is really important is we have to look at the concessions that McCarthy is making. I mean, basically, he has just emasculated the speakership to the point that there's really no speakership. I mean, if the reports overnight are right, he's agreed that one member can vote to bring him down, can get a vote to bring him down. When we were in charge of the House, it was 50 members to even get a Democratic caucus to meet to consider whether you were going to remove a speaker. One member, that's like the Senate, where they operate by unanimous consent. There's a reason that we have different procedures in the House and Senate, and if the House operates like the Senate, we will never get anything done. I mean, but even worse, the concessions have changed all the power arrangements in the House. So the nutcase caucus, the Freedom Caucus, is in charge. I heard they're going to give him 4 seats on the Rules Committee. 4 seats on the Rules Committee, which decides what gets to the floor. I heard he made a deal overnight with some Republican right-wing PAC, I think Governor Norquist's PAC maybe, that he wouldn't endorse candidates in Republican primaries in Republican districts. What does that do? All that does is empower the extremists in those districts. They want to have all sorts of select committees. I mean, basically what they want to do is they want to make sure that the #1 priority of the country is investigating Hunter Biden's laptop. I mean, these are nutcases. And the concessions he made, if he gets elected, which I suspect will not happen, but it could, and if somebody else gets elected, if those same rules apply, the House is just going to be, it's going to be a food fight from day one. But then there are the political consequences, okay? And I think they're all bad for the Republicans. Maybe I'm wrong, but the Republican majority exists because 22 Republican members won in districts that Joe Biden won the presidency for. Those are swing districts by definition. When you skew your caucus so much that all of the power, all of the messaging comes from your nutcase extremists. If we learned one thing in 2022 is that voters in swing districts don't like, in swing states don't like extremists. All the power is going to be with the extremists. It's going to be harder to nominate moderate candidates in those districts because of the deals he's made. So they've probably done more to jeopardize Republican control of the House in the last 2 days than anything they'll do over the next 2 years. So where do we go? I mean, I suppose it's possible that Steve Scalise or some other member Stefanik or some other member of the leadership will be able to put together 218 votes. But judging from the attitudes of the rebels, I'm not so sure that anybody could. So maybe the only course, and this is a very long shot, but it's probably the best course for the country, find a good dozen good men in the Republican caucus who make a deal with the Democrats, not for a Democratic speaker, but for a moderate Republican speaker, because Republicans should have the speakership, but they also then have a deal on committee chairmanships, on committee ratios, on rules that allow the House to operate as a functional body. That would be the best course at this point, but I suspect it's not going to happen.
Craig, that's a lot of territory to cover, but I'm sure you have some thoughts about our local congressman and his role in this interesting drama that's being played out.
Well, indeed, reporting suggests that our Congressman Andy Harris, with a little legislative record after several years in Congress, now wants to become chairman of an appropriations subcommittee on healthcare. Since he's in the healthcare community, I suppose that makes sense, but he's not really ever been preeminent in healthcare policy in Congress, at least as far as I can observe. But it goes to Al's point of consequences. There's a group of people, of Republicans, who care deeply about healthcare policy. Whether you agree or disagree with them, they're standing in line for a position like that. And to think that it would be handed to a congressman who has done little in several years is kind of unthinkable. It makes it hard to hold us together. It does remind me, and Al has got many more anecdotes than I do on the Hill, but one, it's an amazing irony. In early 2000s, the Ways and Means chairman was Bill Thomas, Congressman Bill Thomas from Bakersfield, California, who had a young staffer named Kevin McCarty. Bill Thomas, it wasn't always the easiest guy to get along with, but I've always thought of him as one of the smartest and maybe most cunning legislators, and certainly chairman around. And he decided his effort was going to go into passing Medicare reform legislation. Because he was such a strong chairman, because of the rules in the House, because of the makeup of the membership of the Rules Committee, he crafted this major piece of legislation without even showing it to Democrats. In fact, he didn't show it to the Republicans in his own committee. But the rules that's not necessarily a good thing, but the rules that he was able to utilize allowed him to bring to the floor a Medicare reform package that had very severe limitations on any amendments and pass it out. So McCarthy learned, at the feet of a congressman, of a committee chairman who used everything that the rules provided him with in order to move legislation through Congress. And that's what Kevin McCarthy in 20 years seems to have completely forgotten about and is casting aside. I don't see how holding the kind of speakership he is creating is really worth having, except that he'll get a nice airplane and he'll be number 2 in succession to the presidency, at least for a while. But and Al is quite right. The issues that are coming at us are ones that are considerably more difficult to resolve than the speakership battle. So if you're a leader who can't amass 218 votes to become speaker, you're going to be very hard put to deal with appropriations, debt ceiling, all the issues coming at us. I think Al's formula is an interesting one, and it would be putting together some kind of a coalition group. It would give us many advantages going forward. I just don't know whether they can do it. This is in no way good, by the way, for Republicans. This actually, I think, is going to set us back still further. But I really think, in a way, we almost have to go through this because of where we are with the Republicans in the House of Representatives. The person who must be sitting back more relieved than anybody today is Liz Cheney, who probably is just thankful not to be in that mess. But she certainly did forecast some of the problems we would have.
Al, you have the last word, but I was also intrigued by your possible solution. Who are moderate Republicans? Who comes to mind when you bring that suggestion up?
Well, first of all, a point about Andy Harris and his committee chairmanship. There are other demands too from these rebels. And one thing to remember is that if they get those appointments, somebody else doesn't in the Republican caucus. So there may be some leakage on the other side because of that. And the other point I just want to emphasize is this has to be solved in the House. Okay, it's not going to be solved anywhere else. It's in the and it really has got to be solved either in the Republican caucus or by some sort of a bipartisan coalition. And the reason I know that is because when I was head of the House Democratic Caucus, we put extraordinarily large majorities on 4 key committees, okay? Rules, Ways and Means, Appropriation, and Budget. So we had super majorities on those committees. So the Republicans, it was in Reagan's first term, and as you know, Reagan had a lot of power, a lot of sway even in the Democratic caucus, but by putting super majorities on those committees, we could prevent the Reagan Democrats from undermining the TIPS ruling, TIPS strategy. The Republicans sued us. They sued me and Gillis Long, the chairman of the caucus, Ari Weiss, who was running the steering committee for TIP and TIP, and the court threw it out because they said it. It is another. The courts have no jurisdiction on because of separation of powers of the what goes on in the House. Now, who could be this? I don't know if there are any current members. Of course, there are no current members in the House because nobody's been sworn in. But the name that always comes back to my mind is Fred Upton, who was a retiring Republican from Michigan. I know him. I've known him for a long time, and I've always thought he's a very good guy. When I was a Cub fan, he was a Cub fan, so he probably still is. So he has some good qualities, but I think somebody like that. But the real deal is got to be on rules and committees, committee makeup and all of that, because it doesn't matter who the speaker is if you have the rules that Kevin McCarty has negotiated. Yeah. And nobody in his sane right mind would take that speakership under those conditions unless you wanted the airplane and wanted to be listed at some point in your life in the history books as being speaker. But you're not going to clearly get anything done. I think it's going to be a hard thing to do. But essentially what you have to have, it'd be wonderful if you could get 50 or 100 Republicans who said, we've just had it. We're not going to let the nutcases control our caucus. We're going to go see if we can work a deal, because there could some on the Democratic side who won't go along. Yeah. I can't imagine the squad, but our great advantage is the squad is 4 or 6 members. The most extreme left in our party. And Pelosi was with the same majority, was able to maneuver around them. This Freedom Caucus seems to be, maybe a third of the Republican caucus, and that's a big problem. But anyway, I don't know whether it's possible to do, but in the end, it may be the only reasonable solution. Not only for the Republicans, but for the country as a whole, because it's the only way you could possibly get a governable House.
We have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.